This podcast is produced by the Harwood Productions Podcast Network. To learn more about the network and to find more of our shows, visit us online at www.harwoodpodcast.com.
Hey there everyone, and welcome back to In Range. My name is Cameron Harris, and this is episode number 3. In our last episode, we talked about how to learn how many carbs are in labeled foods, or how to read those little nutrition facts you see printed on the side of containers. But what about those kinds of foods like fruits and vegetables that don't have those handy little labels printed on the sides? Well, that's what we're going to learn today. How to figure out what carbs are in unlabeled foods. Now, there are several different ways we can measure how many carbs are in foods like these, and they all hinge on this book. This is just a book that's filled with nutritional facts for all kinds of different foods that don't typically have nutrition labels. And we'll have a link to this in the website if you want to pick up a copy. Everything's organized alphabetically, so why don't we start with something pretty simple. How about an apple? So to do that, all we need to do is flick through the book here, find the A's. Apple, here we go. With peel, an apple that's about 2 3/4 of an inch wide, about 20 to 21 grams, depending on the type of the apple, but it doesn't vary too much. So we can pretty much say that this apple is 20 grams. That's about 1 carb. Now, here's something interesting. What about a banana? Now, looking at the banana, you might think maybe 1 carb for every banana, but if you look in the book, bananas are surprising. So here we go. 1 fresh banana is a total of 33 grams. It's about twice as much as one would typically think. So, I mean, 1 banana will typically range between 2, sometimes even 3 carbs, depending on the size. It's always a good idea to check things like fruit because you never know how many carbs are going to be in those. Now, in some cases, you need to measure things by weight. For example, what if you have something like a loaf of bread that doesn't have nutrition facts on the side because it's not sliced? Well, fortunately, there's a pretty simple rule for breads. 1 ounce of bread equals 1 carb. Very simple equation. All you need to measure this is just cut yourself off a hunk and use a scale. Make sure it's set to the ounces position by just switching the mode. And then just pop it right on. So this piece of bread is about 1.8 ounces. So figure you round that off to maybe 2 ounces. It's about 2 carbs worth of bread right here. It's always a good idea to measure the bread until you really get a feel for it, because if this were a much lighter bread, this could easily be only 1 carb's worth. But this is a more dense bread, so it's 2 carbs. Now, measuring cups are another really good way to go for things like mashed potatoes, for example. Potato has a pretty simple rule associated with it, similar to bread. A potato, in pretty much any form, 1/2 of a cup of potato equals 1 carb, or 1 cup equals 2 carbs. So a whole potato could be 2, maybe 2.5 carbs, judging by the size of this one. Mashed potatoes, same exact thing, except you want to measure them. So get, depending on how much you want, maybe, let's say, 1/2 of a cup. Just spoon them out. And you don't have to get incredibly accurate about this. Use this just as a guide. Something right around there. So that right there is about 1 carb's worth of potatoes. You could go with maybe another 1/4 of a cup, call it 1.5. Go with a whole cup, call it 2 carbs. Whatever you like. And rice. This is another really good thing. Rice, because it's similar to potato in that it's a pretty starchy food, you would think it'd be pretty similar to potatoes. But we've already been surprised by the bananas. Let's just check on the rice real quick, make sure that we're on the right track with it. And rice, here we go. But if we just go with a typical rice, about a half a cup of rice, 33 grams. It's almost twice as much as potato. And just a good general rule for rice, about a third of a cup of rice, so about that much, is 1 carb. Cooked rice. It's very important because rice does tend to fluff up when it's cooked. Once it's cooked, it's a third of a cup for every 1 carb. That's very different than potatoes. It's quite a bit less. And you could easily, if you're having a lot of this, you could easily get off by 1 or 2 carbs if you're just assuming. So it's always a good idea to have one of these books around because foods will surprise you with their carb content every single day. So just to reiterate something from our last episode, always remember this ratio. 15 grams of carbohydrate equal 1 whole carbohydrate. Things in these books are usually listed as grams, so it's always important to make that conversion to whole carbs. And also remember, when you're going off of a book like this with non-labeled foods, you can measure things using a scale, you can measure things using measuring cups, and of course, you can always measure things just straight from a nutrition book like this thing here. Always a good idea to have one of these on hand. And also, remember, this thing does include a serving size. It will say a third of a cup of rice equals this. It's always important to keep that in mind. Don't just think, oh, a bowl of rice is this many carbs. No, that bowl of rice might be 2/3 of a cup instead of a third a cup. Always double check. It's better to be safe than sorry. And also, it gets easier after a while. Pretty soon you'll be able to just look at a bowl of mashed potatoes and think, okay, judging by its size, I'm going to say that's 2 carbs, or 1 carb, or whatever the case may be. Even so, there are still things that I still check after having it for almost 7 or 8 years now. I still check things in the book, I still measure things, I still weigh things. It's always going to be a part of your life. So until next time, I'll catch you later. Good luck staying in range.